Hey there, John McWhorter.
Hey, Glenn Loury, how are you doing?
Doing okay, John. Welcome to the Glenn Show. We're back in the saddle again. It seems like a long time.
It does. I think it's actually only been a month, but yeah, here we are. So, where are you?
I am sitting in my home in Brookline, Massachusetts, enjoying a week's break from teaching at Brown University and reflecting on all manner of political, spiritual, intellectual, and whatnot during this week's break. I don't know, you're probably working hard over there in Morningside Heights, huh?
Well, yeah, my break was last week, but I didn't get to really have a break because I went to a conference about Creole languages in Münster, Germany, which is 8 hours from here. So basically to get to a conference that starts on Thursday in the morning, you have to leave from the East Coast 2 days before so that you get there in the middle of the day before the conference starts. So basically the whole week I was away, and now I'm still getting past the jet lag. And so here we are.
John,
yeah.
I would be able to feel sorry for you, but for the fact that last week I was at a couple of conferences in Australia where they measure the time difference in days, not hours, John.
You know, the agony just of the plane flight. I mean, how long were you on the plane?
So you fly from Boston to Los Angeles or from Boston to Dallas. Okay, so it's 6 hours to Los Angeles. It's 4 hours to Dallas. Then you board another flight, and from LA, I think it's 14 hours. From Dallas, I think it's 15 hours. You board yet another flight after a little wait, and you fly for more than 12 hours further to finally get to the Southern Hemisphere, across the international date line, and into the future. You know, I left on Friday afternoon heading for Sydney, Australia, and I arrived there on Sunday morning, local time. So anyway, tell me, I think I'm interested. I think the viewers, too, may be interested in what you were doing over there on Creole languages in Deutschland.
Well, you know, it's the funniest thing, which is that the study of Creole languages that we associate most readily with Jamaica or Hawaii or Haiti is done to a considerable extent by German students and scholars, and a lot of the best Creole conferences actually are in university towns in Germany, because Germans studied Creole languages a lot starting in the late 1800s. And so I go to Germany about once a year because of something like this. And this was a conference on, of all things, the Creole languages that were based on Spanish and Portuguese, so the Iberian ones. It was called the Hispanistentag, the Hispanicist Day at the University of Münster, and my conference was part of that. And so it was all about the specific group of Creole languages, and here we are in this little town in Germany, and people from all over the world, many of them speaking Spanish more comfortably than English, were discussing these languages. And it was a lot of fun, except that it required nothing like your plane trip, but you're so far from home and you always know that you've got that same trip back.
But now, the conference language was English, was it?
No, it was English and Spanish. And,
people were presenting in Spanish?
Oh, yeah, question sessions in Spanish, and it was sort of the unspoken idea. And it's funny how little Creolists talk about this. You just get dragged into things. It's just assumed that you can handle that. I guess they suppose that if you can't, you'll say so. And I can speak Spanish and talk about, say, diapers and it being a nice day, but to talk about anything academic or to have a sense of humor, forget it. I've never.
But can you follow someone else who would be presenting a scholarly paper in Spanish?
Yeah, easily. Yeah. And so if you read a lot, then you find yourself able to do that. And I can ask a question haltingly, but you're allowed to speak English, but sometimes you kind of feel like the fashion shifts from talk to talk. But so it was a day very much of dealing with English and Spanish at the same time. It's always good to keep in.
But now your German hosts were not speaking German at their German conference on Spanish and Portuguese language Creoles.
Not a whole lot. They would only speak with each other, although most of the material for the organizing was only sent out in German and Spanish. It was the English wasn't even used, so you had to make all of your arrangements and stuff in German or Spanish. But no, there's a tacit sense that you don't give a presentation in German because there aren't enough people outside of Germany who could handle that. But with Spanish, they figure you sink or swim, and I think they should. So yeah, it was very interesting. It gave me a good linguistic workout because, of course, in the town you have to speak German, and I like to at least try, and so that was fun. And so it was great, but I did not get a spring break. Well, so what were you doing in Australia?
Well, I was doing two things basically. I mean, the main thing I was doing was hanging out with my main man and my buddy Bruce Western, the sociologist, the Harvard sociologist who writes about social policy and inequality in contemporary societies, particularly the United States. He is a native Australian, Bruce Western, my friend. Mm-hmm. And I think his most important book is Punishment and Inequality in America, which is maybe 5 or 6 years old now. But it was an early and very rigorous and definitive survey and critique of the over-incarceration in the United States was this book of Bruce's. It's how I came to know him. So he directs a center on social policy and inequality at Harvard. Mm-hmm. And as it happens, Bruce Western's brother, Mark Western, is a sociologist who directs a center for research in the social sciences at Queensland University in Brisbane, Australia. So these two brothers, both sons of a sociologist father who had held a chair also at Queensland, were getting together to collaborate on an international conference on race, inequality, and the family. That's what it's called. Sponsored by the Institute for Social Science Research at Queensland University, whose director is Mark Western. So Bruce invited me. I came along with 3 other of his Harvard colleagues, and we constituted a kind of tag team of research presentations who held a symposium at this institute at Queensland University on race, inequality, and social policy in the United States, because that's what we know about. But our interlocutors in the university in Australia brought to the table many of the issues that they're concerned about over there, inequality to be sure, social policy to be sure, but also Aboriginal issues, which are not quite race, but you might think are race-like. So that's one of the things I was doing. The other part of that trip, also very interesting, was had me in Canberra, the national capital, speaking at a day-long event. Actually, it was a day and a half, where there were a series of panels that involved researchers like myself from the U.S. and researchers from, this is now Australian National University, ANU, which is located in Canberra. Actually, ANU might be in Melbourne for all I know, but in any case, the government center is in Canberra, and that's where the conference was. So there were university people, and then there were government ministers who were giving keynote addresses. There were like 4 keynote addresses given, each one by a minister of the government with a different portfolio, the labor and education minister, the energy and environment minister, and so forth. And the audience were a bunch, maybe 100 or so mid-level civil servants working in the Australian national government in these various ministries. And the portfolio that we had to discuss in these panels was, how can we foster more productive relations between research communities on the one hand and public policy makers on the other? So it was a little bit ill-defined. We weren't exactly presenting research papers. We were sitting around on panels, listening to these ministers make keynote addresses, and then reacting to them and to the audience's questions that were coming into us about, what the various potentially unexploited synergies and areas of productive interchange are between the so-called scholarly community and the world of public policy and public decision-making. So that was my Australia trip, a whirlwind. I was over there less than a week. It took 2 days to get there and 2 days to get back, it seemed. Actually, it took 2 days to get there and like 2 hours to get back. I landed in Dallas literally 1 hour earlier local time than I had taken off on the same day from Australia after a 15-hour flight. So
I got invited to Australia several years ago for something kind of like this, and my first response was I was flattered because, they were way over there, and the idea that they picked out my name. And I planned to go, and then I heard about what this kind of trip entails, and I happen to have a neighbor on down the street from me who's Australian. And, Glenn, I wasn't up for it. I mean, especially these days with what flying starts to be like, and, how tight the seats are locked in there, and what you have to go through in each airport. And I just thought, it's not worth it. And I had to disappoint them, and they got somebody to go in my place, luckily. So I admire your fortitude that you actually sat on that plane for 2
particularly
days.
Since you may be 1 or 2 decades younger than me. I mean,
Yeah, I don't know how you
Well, my
stood it.
back still hurts to get. No, well, first of all, while they would not spring for a business class seat, which would have been like,
For example.
a business class seat would have probably been like 10 grand or 8 grand or something like that. They did spring for what's called premium economy.
That matters.
No, you're not kidding.
Yeah.
An incremental layers, which is not quite business class. You cannot recline all the way back in your seat and whatnot. But you had more leg room, more shoulder room, and you could let yourself back a fair amount. And I didn't feel like completely oppressed in my
Right.
chair for the 20 hours that it takes to get from one place to the other. But it wasn't that bad. I mean, sleep is an important thing, right? If you can get to sleep and stay asleep for 4 or 5 or 6 hours, that kills about a third of it. And then, there's movies galore, and I read this amazing novel. Not that that's what we came here to talk about. I don't know if you know Yoko Ogawa, the Japanese novelist.
No.
An earlier book of hers was called The Professor and the Housekeeper, which is a whimsical story about this absent-minded professor, absent-minded because he has some mental defect that causes him not to be...
But wait a minute, Glenn, before
Yeah.
we go ahead, let me ask
Yeah.
you something else about the flight,
Okay.
because this is a genuine question. What do you do when you've got a flight that long, and inevitably somebody on either one side of you or the other wants to talk? Because the problem is that once that person starts, there's no graceful ending point. And another reason I didn't do it is because I knew that happens on long flights, and it's hard not to hurt people's feelings. It's okay to have a short conversation, but you're going to wind up with somebody who would rather talk than read. You must have met that person. What did you
Well,
say?
I didn't meet him on this flight, but I know what you mean. And
Yeah.
I find that to be a hilarious observation and, a very good point, too. Because since we are courteous, we are loath to turn to the neighbor and say, sir, I am going to read and I do not wish to be disturbed, okay?
Yet there's no way to say that.
Well, there's a way to say it, but we
Exactly.
can't bring ourselves to do it. Because we have this built-in kind of inhibition to being socially disruptive in some way. We're social animals, it's probably...
And people don't understand.
No, they'll take offense.
Understandably,
They'll
they
take
do.
offense.
Yeah.
Who do you think you are? And, you can't even bother to talk to me. We're going to be partners here for the better part of a day. And, we can't even have a
Exactly.
conversation. So I guess you need to practice certain devices for, if the person is talking, not being rude, but at the same time communicating. But it's a very, it probably gets down to stuff like body language, like, right? It's
subtle,
very
yeah.
subtle, right? You don't want eye contact. I mean, if the person says something to you, there are probably different routes that you can take in response. One which invites further inquiry, and the other which doesn't invite further inquiry. And you didn't even get to what I think is like the hardest problem here, which is even if you're willing to engage in talk, suppose you just want to talk small talk, and suppose they want to talk about something like
Exactly.
politics
Yeah.
or
And,
religion,
I'm happy to talk for a little while, but you get the kind of person who would really rather talk for 6
And
hours.
who then
That's the
blurts
kind of
out
thing.
absurd opinions like, I think Obamacare is ridiculous, or I think Obamacare is the greatest thing that's happened to mankind, or something which you don't agree with, but you don't feel like you need to labor through explaining to this person the character and depth of their error.
Especially if they learn that you're somebody who's engaged in things like that. Then they want to talk about it at length. Exactly.
Yeah. So the etiquette of long flights and social intercourse is an interesting question. I did not have that problem. There are such things as headphones, You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
Once you put them on, people don't talk to you anymore.
You know, the truth is, actually, after my Australia invitation, and we'll get back to the novel, I did get invited to go to Papua. I went all the way to New Guinea.
Wow, man.
And this was now 4 years ago, and I did do that. So I have been through this. And the one thing I remember is that I had somebody, if we're going to Papua, most of the people on the plane are Chinese or Indonesian or whatever. Of course, I end up sitting next to the white American couple. And of course, they want to talk. And I had movies, I had books, and I noticed the headphones was one thing. But they're waiting. They're like, they're waiting for me to get those headphones off so they can ask me where I'm from, and then they see that I've got a certain kind of magazine. And the truth is, I was very polite but firm in not letting the conversation go past 5 minutes. And I think the guy was a little annoyed. And I thought to myself, I'm sorry, he's just going to have to understand I am not talking to these people for 16 hours. But I felt bad about it in a way. So I just wondered how you...
Well, John, maybe we oughtn't to be so self-important. And maybe we ought to allow for the possibility that there's somebody really interesting in that seat next to us. And it's not just, like an obligation or a chore, but it's an opportunity, right? They look at you and they see, African-American, sophisticated, who's engaged in international travel on his way to something interesting. And they want...
Reading strange books.
Strange books, and with me, it's my notepads open, the equations are sprawled. I get this all the time, man. I'm trying to do my research work or get my teaching notes together. I got a little calculus on the pad. I mean, it's nothing deep, all right? And people look over, and as soon as they see a squiggly, a curlicue, an equation,
they want to know what.
And plus, their eyes glaze over, and they say, "Oh man, I couldn't do math when I was in college." I mean, like, what's more boring than that? Your confession of ignorance is of absolutely no interest to me.
Where's that conversation?
By the way, the world is full of people who know calculus. You just don't happen to know any of them.
Right.
But I'm saying maybe.
But you know the problem that I'm referring to.
I know, and I'm trying to allow for the fact that sometimes that person might actually be Yoko Ogawa, the Japanese novelist. And man, if I happened to sit next to her and she wanted to talk, I'd be all ears for the entire 20 hours to Australia. But let me tell you.
Anyway, sorry.
No, it's okay. Let me tell you about this novel, which is very interesting. So Yoko Ogawa, she's a relatively young, hot, really up and coming or coming, up, I should say, Japanese novelist. And that first book of hers that I read, the Professor and the Housekeeper, is whimsical and a delightful exploration of this relationship between an ordinary woman who comes to work as a housekeeper for this academic and this absent-minded academic who's absent-minded because he has this mental defect that prevents him from remembering anything from one day to the next. Okay? He has this short-term memory problem, and he can't remember people's names. He can't remember what appointments he has. And so he goes around with notes pinned to his jacket that remind him of all the things that he's otherwise inclined to forget. And he's a mathematician, and these people work out a modus vivendi, the housekeeper and the professor, which is not, erotic romantic, but there's something very sweetly kind of romantic and humane about the whole thing. The novel's just wonderful. And a couple of summers ago, my late wife, Linda, chose this book as the one that we would take with us up to our summer place where we had our children and grandchildren gathered and would read aloud with them over the course of 3 or 4 evenings as a way of entertaining ourselves because we don't want to turn on the TV, And it was just delightful. So I thought Yoko Ogawa, and then I saw this novel, her newest, which is called Hotel Iris. Well, man, I'll tell you, it's anything but whimsical, okay? There's a 17-year-old girl who is under her mother's thumb. Her mother runs the Hotel Iris, which is a hotel on a resort coastal location somewhere on the Japanese islands. And there's the 17-year-old girl who's 17, and she's chafing under her mother's thumb, and she's coming into her own. And then there's the 60-something tenant at the hotel who, let's just say, has something of a checkered pattern of social behavior. I mean, he's thrown out because the prostitute that he takes up the hotel room with ends up complaining publicly and loudly in the hallway about his behavior, and all the guests come out, and the mother throws him out of the hotel. But the 17-year-old girl and the 60-something-year-old man find their way back together, and the rest is for people who want to read the novel. He happens to live alone on an island that you only get to from a ferry from the mainland. there's a sadomasochistic dimension to this complex relationship that develops between the May, December, whatever you want to call the relationship that develops between these people. It's dark and powerful, deeply powerful. And so, I lost myself in this novel, and that killed, I don't know, another 5 or 6 hours on my way over there. And I've been reading Junot Diaz. You must know Junot Diaz,
Oh yeah, I've read the Oscar Wilde book. That's right. It's excellent.
Yeah, and he's got it's a book of short stories. This is how you lose it, man. Oh man, I just love that guy. Dominican brother, you know what I'm saying? Really.
In his book, the Oscar Wilde book, he describes being in a certain dorm when he's at Rutgers, and it's exactly the dorm that I lived in, and it's exactly the way that dorm was socially, and so I can just smell everything that he talks about in his novel when he's in college, and even when he's not writing those passages, he's definitely one of the best of the new or newish people. Yeah. He brings life to the page.
It really is amazing, and this nuanced treatment of the relationships, the male-female stuff that's going on along, and then the immigrant experience, these people coming over from the island, in this case Dominican, Santo Domingo, and New Jersey, New York, and working in factories and living 10 to a room, and the guy's got a wife back home on the island with kids, but he's shacked up with the girl over here or whatever. The race thing, the black brothers who, the brown brothers who are Afro-Dominican on the one hand, and the white girls and this and that. And I like this guy. You were at Rutgers?
Yeah, I went to Rutgers for my last 2 years. I went to Simon's Rock for the first 2 and then transferred to Rutgers.
I never knew that.
And it was kind of, I don't talk about it much because it was kind of a mistake. I wasn't paying enough attention to where I wanted to go to college, and it wasn't my campus, but I found a dorm predictably full of the sort of quirky, artistic, self-consciously bookish types. And that was basically my world. And, that dorm still has it's got a Facebook page and still has reunions. So you were kind of at a school within a school. But I should have gone to Swarthmore, but Swarthmore didn't accept people from Simon's Rock, and Haverford was the next choice, but I or my mother or both of us forgot to fill out a financial aid form, and by the time we realized that it was too late to get any, and so Rutgers just ended up being this fallback. It was okay, but I could have been somewhere that was more challenging. Rutgers is a better university now than it was 30 years ago. When I was there, I needed more.
Now, it is,
but I was there.
Rutgers is a public university, is it not? The State University of New Jersey? I'm asking.
That's right.
That's my understanding. Yeah. And so it ought to be first rate, right? New Jersey is a relatively prosperous state. It's got a highly educated population and big middle class and stuff like that.
It is, and it is now. But when I was at Rutgers, it was a school where the basic tone was set by first-generation college students. It was white kids who were from, I guess, what you would call lower or middle-class backgrounds, who were the first generation to go to college, and they were there for very practical reasons. And, God bless it all, but a lot of economics majors, a very heavy fraternity component to what your social life was about. And for whatever it's worth, there was also, this was 20 years after the mid-'60s. A lot of those kids, they weren't slobbering racists, but there was a color line. A lot of them that you weren't going to get through. There was more segregation on that campus than there is today or would be at most schools. So I was a little out of my element. In general, I made do, but they were not the best 2 years of my life. But that was a long time.
Yeah, that was a while ago.
But Glenn, guess what I did a month ago?
Tell me.
I did TED.
Oh, that's right. You did TED. Now, what does that stand for?
I was at TED. I was at Glenn, I forget what TED stands for.
John McWhorter. Wait a minute. I want everybody to know. TED Talk. I mean, when you Google that or you go on YouTube or whatever, what you find is all of these famous people giving all of these fascinating talks about the cutting edge character of new developments in technology or in culture or in communications or science or letters or whatever. And I mean, that's like Malcolm Gladwell gives a TED Talk, I mean, people like that.
There are a lot of people like that.
So John McWhorter.
And online, there's already a sort of audition clip of me where I did a version of the talk that I gave about a month ago last summer when they did one of their TEDx's here in New York. And so that was how it all began, where they don't call it an audition, but it is. And I had no idea that I was going to be chosen to actually go to California. And I was particularly happy about it because when TED originally contacted me, I guess it would be about a year ago now, they wanted me to do my race stuff. And I told them, no. If we're going to do TED and I'm going to go out to Long Beach, California and be with all those, Malcolm Gladwell, Steve Jobs type people. And since I lived in California for 14 years, I knew what the scene was going to be, what the kinds of hors d'oeuvres and dress style and, feel was going to be. I thought, I don't want to be out there doing a glum race thing. I don't want to challenge that audience to think in different ways about race. I thought, I wanted to do something happy. I want to do my fun stuff. I want to do the language stuff. And I could tell that the people who asked me, it's just 2 or 3 people, they didn't know my language stuff. I think they just had seen some things I wrote in the New Republic. And I can tell that they weren't expecting much because they have no idea that, language is something that I do with a certain passion. And I gave my audition, and apparently that worked. And I was glad because the truth is, if I had done a race talk, I would have stood no chance of being asked to go out to California.
No, that's true. I mean, they don't want somebody coming in there and disturbing the atmosphere and all that. But
and actually, I did on a previous conversation with you on Blogging Heads. I actually talked about the TED auditions, although I took the label off of it. But then I'm going to still keep it kind of coy. There was a person who did a race talk during my auditions, and it's somebody of a certain prominence, a black person of a certain prominence. And watching that person, I thought, boy, I made the right decision because despite the fact that this is a pretty well-known name, I thought that person is never going to make it out to Long Beach, and that person did not. So I was happy that I made my decision to put myself in competition.
I mean, this is fit subject for another extended conversation about how race as a topic ain't sexy anymore. You know what
exactly.
I mean, it's hard to say anything that's going to hold anybody's interest. I mean, there are a bunch of cliches that we could put on bumper stickers and we could paste up on the wall, and there's a shtick that one can go through or trot out every February when it's Black History Month, or
it's a spent conversation.
Whatever. But I think there's a lot to it.
There's nothing new to be
said.
On
the other hand, it's not a spent issue of public urgency or moral accountability. In my humble opinion, I could go on about that, but bottom line would be we still are living with the legacy of a racialized history and social organization that produces a lot of social injustice and so forth and so on. But nobody wants to hear it.
That, and we can talk about things that are urgent and the way different events come up and show different ways that they're urgent. But in terms of something like TED, where what they want is people standing there talking about new frontiers and new ways of thinking, on race, there's just nothing that could truly qualify. There's nothing to be said in that setting.
Well, hold on. Let me suggest to you that there might be, and that is, that is the coming transracial, or the future of race, which is very different from the present of race, and which is being remade on a daily basis by intermarriage and biracial kids, and Obama being president, and many other things besides, which are creating by 2050 a person might be able to say, and might be able even to get interesting saying it, will be a world unlike any that our ancestors could ever have imagined in terms of the transformation of race. But that's a stretch. Definitely. But I want to ask you, who are the audience and what did you say?
The audience were mostly highly educated. I want to say white, but frankly, white in the sense of the blog and book stuff. White people like white, as in white, Asian, Latino, black, white people.
Like you.
Very, very blue American, and also, I think, a West Coast bias, and so a certain kind of affluent, earthy crunchiness. It was very much a sort
How big was the audience?
Silicon Valley.
How many? And what was the setting? What was the setting, and how many people were present?
The setting was a very lush and very speaker-comfortable auditorium in Long Beach, California. And the number of attendees was either 1,500 or 3,000. I'm going to go with 1,500.
Okay, big.
And some of them were former speakers. And Therefore, you have people like Jonathan Haidt and Sam Harris walking around and having lunches and dinners where people sit and talk to them. And there are various just stars who come to it who are socially aware. I was texting to my wife as I was like within their breathing space. Goldie Hawn, Rashida Jones, Ben Affleck. One
in
of
the
guys
audience?
who wrote the musical. They were in the audience and walking around, eating shrimp and drinking coffee.
See.
It was really
that's pretty
fun
cool,
in
man.
a kind of a stargazing kind of way, and there was an awful lot of money. There's some obscene amount that people have to pay to go to TED, and it's worth it. I mean, the talks were fascinating. The staff was very nice, and what I talked about was the development of a new grammar in the text messaging the teenagers and
Cool. Hold on a minute before you.
are
Is it up? Is that talk and the others up on the web?
They haven't put me up yet. There's kind of a preview of it because there's my audition from last summer. But I don't love that because I didn't iron my shirt well enough because I didn't know that it was going to be online.
Okay.
And so I'm looking a little rumpled. But that one seems to have gotten a certain amount of attention because what I did in California a month ago got written up by Wired, and that seems to have kind of bounced me around.
Oh man, you're the
so,
new thing. You're the next new thing, John.
Well, I don't know about that, but it was fun to
Tell
go
us
to
tell
Long
us what
Beach.
you said.
And I'm going to write a TED book. I'm going to write a TED ebook on the subject, and that's going to be my first ebook. But I made all sorts of nice connections. I think I'm writing a column for Time Ideas, Time Magazine's website, just based on somebody who came up to me afterwards.
Cool.
So I highly recommend it.
Well,
it was a lot of.
If I get invited to audition, then I'll iron my shirt and do my best. But let me ask you this, my man. So you say a new language or linguistic innovation associated with the technology of texting and so forth. Is that something more than a dictionary of abbreviations and a lack of attention to grammar and punctuation? I mean, what's the deeper linguistic point about how, limiting ourselves to 240 characters or whatever it is changes the way we communicate with each other?
They're developing new bits of actual grammar. So, for example, LOL is part of what they
I've seen that.
It means, I'm laughing out loud. But if you look at the way LOL is used now by people who text all day, it's not about laughter anymore. Somebody will put something like, LOL, I'm in the library, I've been here for an hour. And that's not funny at all. It's because the whole thing has gradually entered into having the kind of meaning that small words in any language start to have to convey attitude. And so LOL solicits a kind of an empathy, solicits two people to kind of laugh together because they both understand the situation. In the same way as young black men use yo, and so them pants was tight, yo. Well, what does the yo mean? The yo is kind of a sort of come hither that
man.
Any language has something like that. Well, texting now has it's yo. And I talked about that
that's
and
cool,
a couple
John.
of other these new developments. Because I've been learning that from students. We used to talk in early blogging heads about whether I missed the university. And one thing I had never thought about is that being up here every day, I now see what these 20-year-olds are doing. And I didn't know there was a new text language.
And they're always 20 years old. They never get any older than 20. So, you're right on the edge all the time.
It's true. But I'm learning all sorts of stuff from what is now a generation and a half, away from me. And this texting, I learned about it last spring, and I think it's fascinating. I'd love to write a little book about it. I'm going to do it with the help of one of my students who is writing a paper about it with me. And so that happened, and I'm glad I went there. And they flew me business class, just 6 hours.
Oh, man, you had to say that. You had to tell me that, right?
It was very pleasant. So that is the last thing I did before Germany.
Way to go, John. John, I think we've had a great conversation. Let's call it a day now.
I'm going to drive home. That's right. So, Glenn, let's do this again. And some news will have happened in 3 or 4 weeks, and we can break all of that.
Well, news has happened. The Supreme Court is hearing these cases on gay marriage. President Obama went over and affirmed the Zionist vision for the state of Israel in speeches that made nice with the Israeli people. Affirmative action is on the chopping block, as it were. Yep. And there's much to discuss, so viewers, stay tuned.
That's right.
Thanks a lot, John. We'll talk later.
See you soon, Glenn.